So after you saw our last video, you immediately started with process mining and got your first full transparent process. Congratulations, you probably have a spaghetti model that we see at most of our customers. However, what do we do now? Because such a spaghetti model is the reality of what's happening in your process. But is it good? Is it bad? Is it a combination of both? That's where we're going to be helping you with today. Starting to understand and untangle this spaghetti model in actionable insights and steps you can take to improve your process and take full control. And something we call Process Adherence Manager. And it consists basically of two disciplines: process management and process intelligence. Starting with process management, taking again the car example from our previous video, your navigation is always as good as the maps that it runs on. What do we mean with that in terms of process management? Your people will only make the right decisions based on navigation that are being given. And if the maps are outdated, inaccurate, people will start finding their own routes that might be more, but quite often also are less efficient. So with process management, we are working towards creating the right map, your GPS system, to navigate you through your route. Looking how navigation has evolved, we went all the way from these road maps towards GPS. Where at the start, people had to look through multiple pages to understand where they need to go towards a destination. And when there was roadworks, you didn't know really where to go anymore. You had to find your own deviation on this map without it guiding you. Right now, when you step into the car and put on your GPS, it will take into account the traffic, the roadworks, and the best route to get towards your destination. And that is something that we also see evolving within the process management industry. However, unfortunately, we are not there yet. When we look at these process maps, we see that the documentation that we have invested a lot in are still unreliable and disconnected from reality. What does that mean? Is that when we create a map and design a process to be, that the adherence towards it not being measured. So we cannot see whether it's actually reflecting reality. We don't know what the actual deviations are beyond what we might think or see ourselves happening. And we do not understand the root causes based on data-driven research. And that means that how we think we work is not how we actually work. And that leads organizations making decisions on inaccurate data. Secondly, the process management discipline is not supporting our day-to-day work. If you think about stepping into the car and driving to an unknown destination, probably the first thing that you do is use your navigation system. But why are people in processes not doing the same? It's because they often cannot find the right documentation, what they need to use. Also, those tools that have been set up and invested in are collecting dust. Not entire companies using it day to day. And the process teams that can find it struck with the actionability. What do you really need to do now? That means that in large organizations, these process teams struggle to actually convert all of the effort that they put into their documentation into real impact. So putting process management into the bigger picture, it shouldn't be purely documentation on where process should go. It should be a translation from your strategy into execution through operating models, standard operating procedures, basically letting people know what they need to do to have the best impact on the organization. When we have that execution layer where people act within systems, the powerful thing is that we can add process intelligence to the picture. So we go away from just the documentation and start mining these steps and actions that people took to understand what's happening in reality. The spaghetti model again. Right now with process mining, we can turn it into process intelligence by also understanding the deviations from what is supposed to happen and start creating a picture through process adherence management, what's happening in reality, how should we act, and what are these gaps in between, to later on form the foundation for AI-driven decision making. That means that process management and process mining form a perfect union. We are talking about what are the deviations through process adherence management. So taking one step back, how does this look like? When we design a process, let's say again, a purchase to pay process, and we want to buy a laptop, we expect people to set out a purchase requisition. It needs to be procured, it needs to be received, someone is going to approve the payment and the payment will go out. This is the process management side of things, very simplified. When we start adding mining on top of this, we can start looking at the activities that take place and see whether they are happening in the right order or that activities are missing from the picture at all. In this case, we see that requisitions are missing. And it could mean that people are buying laptops without the requisition on it. That is something that you want to act upon. Make a decision to either change the process, customer requisition might have not been necessary at all, or change the behavior by training people, set up the right policies, or changing your IT systems. However, do we really need a requisition for every purchase that we make? Probably not, because based on certain business rules, sometimes purchases can be done automated without those requisitions being required. Think of raw materials. When we look at just the conformance of the activities, we are not able to capture that. But with Process Adherence Manager, we can start adding business context to this entire picture and helping you to understand where requisition is necessary, for example with laptops, compared to when they're not necessary in the direct procurement space. And this helps us to further untangle that spaghetti model by not only looking at the order of the activities, but also the business context, the complexity that is in every organization, to really understand what is correct and what is wrong. Going into Celonis and showing the Process Adherence Manager, you can immediately see a very simplified purchase order process. What's great about Process Adherence Manager is that we can get the data in 3 different methods. We can import a BPM model that you already have laying around in your SharePoint or, for example, in feature documents. We can start mining the data based on what's happening in reality and selecting which variants are in our to-be process. Or we connect it towards your BPMN tooling and make sure that we always have the most up-to-date and approved process map when we start comparing it to reality. In this case, we mined a small piece of data and have our first variant, which we allow for. If you start comparing that towards our other variants, we have a process conformance as the first example. Namely, what we see happening here is that we have a changed purchase order item occurring while we don't have that in our design. We can start filtering on that in a later stage as well, but at least we see already how often this is happening. But as mentioned before, we're not always interested in solely the process conformance, so the steps and the sequence that are occurring. Sometimes we have business rules that we need to take into account, and that's what we added on the top. In this case, when there are imported goods, we expect a different process flow than when they're not imported goods. And imagine that this is only one small example of a business rule. We can start adding a multitude of these business rules into PAM to really start understanding what our process should be looking like and taking variations and complexity of our business into account. Going to another example, we see a more complex process design in this Process Adherence Manager. And also here we have certain deviations. In this case, a missing event of completing the purchase requisition item. You can see where that is occurring. So our process is skipping this step. And we see that it occurs in different locations throughout the process. Taking the first one into account, what is great about having the data on understanding where this is happening, we can start analyzing root causes of, well, context where this is happening more often. And in this case, we have 4 different types of context points, pieces of information where we can dive further into, namely 2 different vendors where we're missing the completion of purchase requisitions and the purchase requisition type, free text purchases. Looking at the vendors is a discussion that we have very often. Oh, but for this attribute, we do it differently. That could be the case. However, this conversation helps us to better understand, do we want to make a deviation and a business rule for this vendor, or should they start working according to the standard that we expect from all our vendors? And secondly, we see a process inefficiency, namely free text requisitions. This helps us to understand better what priority we should give towards creating, for example, a catalog of purchase requisitions to choose from, or training our people to better know what is in our catalog and prevent them from choosing and typing in a free text requisition. That means that Process Adherence Manager does allow us to understand what are the deviations, but also what type of deviations we see. So as you could see in the demo, there is different type of deviations that we can find within Process Adherence Manager. In essence, Process Adherence Manager helps us to real-time understand what's going wrong in our process, find these root causes, help you start the conversations, what's going on and what do we want to do about it. Basically creating a backlog of work to take 100% accountability for everything that's happening in reality compared towards our design. And when looking at these deviations, we see different types. Potentially process issues. Maybe the design is the issue, not what's happened in reality. So we need to update our processes to adhere towards what's happening and is the best way to pursue a process. Could be technology issues. The IT systems might not be well set up, or automations are failing and creating extra work afterwards. People issues. Are people behaving differently than we expect from them from a process perspective? Inefficiencies. We could see different mistakes happening that are having impact not necessarily on compliance, but on the effectivity of our organization and helping us to create more productivity when solving these deviations. And lastly, compliance issues. There might be risks of steps occurring that really shouldn't be happening. And instead of only looking at that at the end of the year through an audit, we can start proactively monitoring these on a real-time basis to prevent them from happening and taking the right actions throughout your organization. And when we start doing this exercise for all the deviations that we see compared to the design, we create 100% accountability of what's happening in our process. It doesn't mean that we've solved all of the issues, but at least we know what's going on and we have it on our radar and can prioritize the steps to take to prevent and optimize our processes. Next to creating such a backlog, as you can maybe imagine, this is also creating a very well-validated digital twin of our organization, telling us what's good and what shouldn't happen. Next to guiding people towards the destination, it also helps an AI make the right decisions at the right point in the process, because it knows where it is and it knows which paths we actually allow for and what could be the wrong decision to take based on the deviations that we have defined. And all of this is putting it back towards the navigation story, progressing us from those paper maps all the way towards navigation with Google Maps, where we know what's happening on the road and which routes we can take for the most efficient way towards the destination. But now also having all of the information involved to start making decisions through AI, helping you as an organization get such a self-driving car through process orchestration. This has been a short video introducing the concept Process Adherence Manager and helping you understand why it's crucial to untangle the spaghetti model that we created or got through the transparency of process intelligence and helping you to use this in effective decision making for your people, but potentially also your automation and orchestration. If you liked this video and found it useful, please like and subscribe to our channel and leave a comment of what you think Process Adherence Manager could add towards your process deviations. Thank you for watching and looking forward to the next one.